Here's what it says. Now when all the kings west of the Jordan heard about these things, those in the hill country, in the western foothills, and all along the entire coast of the Great Sea, as far as Lebanon, kings of the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, they came together to make war against Joshua and Israel. However, when the people of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to a ruse. They went as a delegation whose donkeys were loaded with worn-out sacks and old wineskins, cracked and mended. The men put worn and patched sandals on their feet and wore old clothes. All the bread of their food supply was dry and moldy. Then they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and the men of Israel, "We have come from a distant country. Make a treaty with us." The men of Israel said to the Hivites, "But perhaps you live near us. How can we make a treaty with you?" "We are your servants," they said to Joshua. But Joshua asked, "Who are you, and where do you come from?" And they answered, "Your servants have come from a very distant country because of the fame of the Lord your God. We've heard reports of him, all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, Sihon, king of Heshbon, Og, king of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth. And our elders and all those living in our country said to us, 'Take provisions for your journey, go and meet them, and say to them, we're your servants, make a treaty with us. This bread of ours was warm when we packed it at home on the day we left to come to you, but now see how dry and moldy it is. And these wineskins that we filled were new, but see how cracked they are, and our clothes and sandals are worn out by the very long journey.' Men of Israel sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. And Joshua made a treaty of peace with them to let them live, and the leaders of the assembly ratified it by oath. 3 days after they made the treaty with the Gibeonites, the Israelites heard that they were neighbors living near them. So the Israelites set out on the third day and came to the cities, Gibeon, Kiriath, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. But the Israelites did not attack them because the leaders of the assembly had sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. The whole assembly grumbled against the leaders, but all the leaders answered, "We've given them our oath by the Lord, the God of Israel, and we cannot touch them now. This is what we'll do to them. We will let them live so that the wrath will not fall on us for breaking the oath we swore to them." They continued, "Let them live, but let them be woodcutters and water carriers for our entire community." So the leaders' promise to them was kept. And Joshua summoned the Gibeonites and said, "Why did you deceive us by saying, 'We live a long way from you,' when actually you live near us? You are now under a curse. You will never cease to serve as woodcutters and water carriers for the house of my God." They answered Joshua, "Your servants were clearly told how the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you the whole land and to wipe out all of its inhabitants before you. So we feared for our lives because of you. And that's why we did this. We're now in your hands. Do to us whatever seems good and right to you." So Joshua saved them from the Israelites, and they did not kill them. That day he made the Gibeonites woodcutters and water carriers for the community and for the altar of the Lord at the place the Lord would choose. And that is what they are to this day. Let me recap to you what has happened in the book of Joshua. Beginning of the book, they are ready to cross into the promised land, and they eventually do cross the Jordan River into the promised land, and before them is this big city called Jericho, and they march around the city a number of times, and finally the walls of the city of Jericho crash in, and the people come in, they conquer the city, and it's the responsibility then of the Israelites to go and conquer the whole land. And so they do so, but the first place they go after conquering Jericho is a teeny little outpost called Ai. And they'd always been praying to the Lord to make sure that everything was going to go okay. But before they went to go conquer this teeny insignificant little place called Ai, they didn't pray. And as a result, they took them for granted and they got defeated. And one of the reasons why they got defeated, not only did they not inquire of the Lord, but one of the people, when they conquered Jericho, stole some of the stuff that God had said, don't do. Don't do this. He did it anyway. His name was Achan. And as a result, they lost this battle of Ai. They took care of that problem. They eventually prayed. They went and conquered Ai. And then they made a treaty. They decided to build an altar so that they would be able to honor God. And then after this, they're going to be able to conquer the lands. And we're going to get to that in the coming weeks. But one of the things that has happened now is, as they have made this altar in the valley of Shechem, the Gibeonites have come. And it's the passage that I just shared with you now. This is taken from the Gospel of Luke in the New Testament, chapter 16, verse 8. The people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. That's true. If you're not sure about that, think of our willingness to follow any leader, to promote any cause, to believe any doctrine, to support any work, as long as it's prefaced with the word Christian. Let me give you a good example of that. A number of years ago, Billy Graham, the very first time he went to go visit the President of the United States was Harry Truman. And when he left after having visited Harry Truman, the reporters were all around him and said, "What did you do?" And he said, "Well, we prayed." And they said, well, then you show us how you prayed. And Billy Graham knelt down on the sidewalk right there. And when Truman heard about that, he was one ticked off president. The children of this world are shrewder than the children of light. And also in the Christian community, one time, maybe you remember this, Procter & Gamble had their advertising, had a little symbol, and it was, the Christian community said, well, that symbol is satanic. And all the proceeds that Procter & Gamble have gained has gone to their work. And finally, Procter & Gamble had to pull their product in order to stop the rumors. It wasn't true. But the children of this world are wiser, more shrewd than the children of light. Let me give you another example. Think of the number of times that the Christian community has set a date for the second coming of Christ. There are some people who are so vulnerable that they sell every single thing they own because Jesus is on the way. And time after time after time after time, we hear silly, stupid things by prominent Christian publishers that never take place. Jesus said something else. Jesus said, "I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves." Over and over and over again, God warns us in His Word about the nature of evil, and we ought to be aware of it. And every Christian lives a life of belief in a world of evil, and we need to be very, very careful. In the classic novel Moby Dick, Starbuck said, "I will have no man on my ship who is not afraid of a whale." If you read the Bible, you become quite aware that God says to us, "I will have no man or woman or child in my kingdom who is not afraid of evil." That's what we're going to talk about this morning. One of the things that upsets me is what I would call Disney World Christianity. If you want to have a wonderful life, if you want to have a beautiful life, then you need to become a Christian. If you want to have a life that has no troubles at all, become a Christian. Do you want your best life now? Right now? Then become a Christian. That's a lie. Yes, Jesus died on the cross for me and told me that I am going to live forever when I put my trust in Him. Yes, He has given me a cause, and He has given meaning to my life, and I'm really, really glad for that. I have joy. Yes. Is it real? Yes. Is it easy? not on your life. I have a whole set of ethical standards that I need to follow that the world does not follow. And my heart gets broken in places where God's heart is broken, and yours should be too. God has called me to live in a hard place. This is occupied territory. This is not my permanent home. And it's not supposed to be easy. This is an evil place. Now, when I say evil, I'm referring to what's written in James chapter 3, verse 15. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly. It's unspiritual, of the devil. James says that there are three kinds of evil. There's the world, there's the flesh, and there's the devil. You ever wonder why nobody ever hijacks a Russian or a Chinese airplane? First of all, the level of technology for the most part is so bad that no hijacker would ever want to be on one of those planes. Secondly, they don't care much about those people, so it's not going to make much difference. But the real reason, I believe, is because the support of terrorism comes from there, and evil does not attack evil. Look what happened in the book of Joshua. The people of God had become obedient. They lost the city of Ai, and they won it back, and they rededicated their lives to God at Shiloh, and now they're ready to move ahead. Aggressive godliness confronting evil. 7 things happened. Let me share with you those 7 things. First, note that when evil is confronted with aggressive godliness, evil defers to other evil. Here's what it says in the first 2 verses. Let me read them to you again. Now, when all the kings west of the Jordan heard about these things, those in the hill country and the western foothills, along the entire coast of the Great Sea — by the way, the Great Sea is the Mediterranean Sea — as far as Lebanon, the kings, and he lists these: the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, they came together to make war against Joshua and Israel. When I got into the ministry, I thought that everybody in the church loved each other. I found out that that is not true. I found out that if you care, you many times fight. If you don't care, you many times don't fight. But we need to work at loving each other. I think about what we've seen in our former denomination. They claim to love each other, care for each other, be tolerant and welcoming. And yet when you read about what they write and you hear what they say, the only thing that they agree on is they don't care for us. Matter of fact, someone at a conference, and I watched this, they offered what they called a prayer that God would place a holy hex on those who were leaving the denomination. When evil is confronted with aggressive godliness, evil defers to other evil. It says in Luke chapter 23, verse 12, that the day that Herod and Pilate became friends, before this they had been enemies. Here's the second thing. Note that when evil is confronted with aggressive godliness, evil deceives. It says in verse 9, your servants have come from a very distant country because of the fame of the Lord your God. Evil doesn't usually come as evil. It often comes religious. It cloaks itself in light. You know, the devil will write a religious book and cloak himself in nice things. Satan doesn't usually tell whoppers, just little white lies. You're so talented. God is so blessed to have you. How can these people treat you like this? You deserve more than you're getting. One little sin won't matter in the end. Evil deceives. Here's a third point. When evil is confronted with aggressive godliness, evil drives. It says, the men of Israel sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. There was a man in the Middle East who had to stop his car because a shepherd was driving his sheep across the street. And after they had crossed the street, this guy got out of his car and he said to the shepherd, I thought shepherds led sheep. And the man said, I'm not a shepherd, I'm a butcher. Someone said that Satan drives, but Jesus leads. I think that's good to remember. If you're under pressure, it probably didn't come from the Lord. Where's pressure come from? It comes from the dark side, not the light side. The Christian faith is instead power under pressure, not power without pressure, but power under pressure. Gore Vidal is an author. I don't agree with pretty much anything this guy ever said. But he did say something that I did agree with, and he said this: in politics and in writing, it is best not to think about it. It is best just to do it, and it shows. Here's a fourth point. When evil is confronted with aggressive godliness, evil distracts. Here's verses 12 and 13. So they said, this bread of ours was warm when we packed it at home on the day we left to come to you, but now see how dry and moldy it is. And these wineskins that were filled were new, but now see how cracked they are. And our clothes and sandals are worn out by a very long journey. The aunt of Ralph Waldo Emerson tried to lead him to Jesus when he was just a little boy. But Ralph Waldo Emerson became so enamored with so many other things that he ended up a bitter old man. And this is what he wrote. He said, when the game is run down, when the enemy lies cold in his blood at our feet, we are alarmed at our solitude. We would gladly recall the life that so offended us. The face no longer seems that of an enemy. It's easy to get distracted. One of my favorite movies, I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's called the movie's called Up. Any of you seen the movie Up? Great movie. It's a kid's movie. Great movie. But there's a scene in there where there's a dog by the name of Doug. So I want you to watch this real quick clip and watch how Doug gets distracted.
Looks like a dog. Oh, it is a dog.
What?
We're not allowed to have dogs in my apartment. Hey, I like dogs.
We have your dog.
Whoa.
Wonder who he belongs to.
Sit, boy. Hey, look, he's trained. Sheep. Uh-huh. Speak.
Hi there.
Did that dog just say hi there?
Oh, yes.
Brad!
My name is Doug. I have just met you, and I love you.
What?
My master made me this collar. He is a good and smart master, and he made me this collar so that I may talk. Squirrel!
I don't know if you caught that, and I was a little bit off, but Doug's talking, all of a sudden he's talking, a squirrel. You ever do that? You ever get distracted? I think it's good to go back. It's good to go back and say, God, do you still love me like, well, you know what? Do I still love you like I used to? Do I care like I should? Do I follow you like I said I would? Or have I been distracted? Here's a fifth thing. When evil is confronted with aggressive godliness, evil divides. It says the whole assembly grumbled against the leaders. Adrian Rogers once said, the devil would much rather stir up a fuss in the people of God than sell a barrel of whiskey anywhere. C.S. Lewis wrote a great book called The Screwtape Letters, and if you have an opportunity to read that sometime, I would encourage you to do so. But one of the things that that the theme of the book is Uncle Screwtape is writing to his demon nephew Wormwood, and in one of the letters he tells Wormwood how he should try to infiltrate the enemy, which we are the enemy, and how by distracting them from doing good things. It doesn't matter if they come to this worship service, because that's a good thing. However, if you can distract them while they're here, let them think about dinner. Let them think about the football game. Let them think about how they don't care for the person who's sitting in front of them. So they're in the place where they should be, but they're distracted. The hardest thing about walking the Christian life is that it's hard to become godly without being critical with those who are not. Do you find that it's easy to be critical of other people because they're not as good as you? It says in Galatians chapter 6, verse 1, these words, "Brothers, if someone's caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted." Here's a sixth point. When evil is confronted with aggressive godliness, evil demoralizes. That means to corrupt one's morals or someone's morale. Now, please see this. One evil leads to another. God explicitly told his people that they were to drive out the inhabitants of Canaan. But they made a deal with the Gibeonites. And now they can't be obedient to God even if they wanted to because of what they did. I remember growing up, I used to dread parent-teacher conferences when I was in school because I would sugarcoat all of my classes to my parents, and the truth always came out. And so when my parents mom and dad went to parent-teacher conferences, they'd sit down and talk with the teacher, and the teacher would say, oh, you should hear how Chuck behaves in class. And then when they'd get home, I would dread them coming home because I knew how I was like in school, and they would have no idea how I was in school because of the report that I would tell them when I was there. That's what evil's like. It starts out little and then it draws you in, and then pretty soon it catches up because there's a mess all around. Little lies lead to big lies. Sexual indiscretion leads to more indiscretions. Little lies lead to big lies. Little things lead to bigger things. And then this last point. When evil is confronted with aggressive godliness, evil diminishes it. Here's what it says at the end of the chapter. So Joshua saved them from the Israelites, and he didn't kill them. That day he made the Gibeonites woodcutters and water carriers for the community and for the altar of the Lord at the place the Lord would choose. And that's what they are to this day. Now, go with me 400 years ahead. And you're in the book of 2 Samuel chapter 21. And God puts a curse on the people of God because King Saul, was unfaithful to the covenant that was made to the Gibeonites in Joshua chapter 9. In other words, the situation is reversed. God is protecting the Gibeonites. Now you go 900 years further to the book of Ezra, chapter 2 and chapter 8. And when Ezra comes back from Babylon, he brings the Gibeonites. They're referred to as the Nethinim. Now that says to me that God can take our disobedience and make a monument that will bring glory to himself. God can use all the garbage in our lives and make a monument out of it. Dennis Miller was trying to teach responsibility to his son, his little boy. And he wanted to call him home from his little friend's house. And what would happen is he would call the house and say, Dennis, little whatever his son's name was, he had to come home. And he'd say, okay, I'll be home. But he would stick around and play for a while. And so finally Dennis said, listen, you are going to have to stop having fun and come home when I call you. And if you don't come home when I call you, there's going to be a punishment. So for a while, the little boy, when Dennis would call, he would come home. But eventually, he didn't come home until after a while. And so Miller thought to himself, I have to call to get him to come, but I don't want to punish him. And so he felt the Lord speaking to him, and he said, I want you to treat your son the same way that I treat you. So what he did was, he called this friend's house on the phone and let it ring one time and then hung up. And the little boy, his son, heard the ring and thought, oh my goodness, I need to go home. And so his son called home and said, Dad, I forgot to call you, but I just heard the phone ring and it reminded me I'll be right home. That's what God does to us. And sometimes that ring, it sounds like a sermon. You think about that. Let's pray. Father, sometimes we need to be reminded of how much you love us. We need to be reminded that we live in a world that does not care for us, and yet we need to care for them. We are not better than anyone, but we are so thankful that you love us, and you give us a ministry, you give us a mission, you give us a job to do, and that is to be Jesus to people that we meet. So we ask you this week that we would be mindful of the things around us and the way that we should live. We ask that you would bring people into our lives that care for us, people who remind us of Jesus, and that we will be able to make a difference. These things we ask in the name of Jesus. Amen. See you next week.
Have a good week, buddy.